It is Friday, September 25th. Let's talk PlayStation. So if you recall on last week's episode, I mentioned how that was the week we were all waiting for when it came to PS5 news. And it was, although as we ramp up closer and closer to PS5 and Series S and X launching this holiday season, we're seeing less rumors, more official announcements, which is always welcomed. Although nothing's really going to top what we just saw a few days ago. So we have that alongside some of the smaller stuff. And before we talk about any of it, we do our PlayStation Plus reminder. So you have a little under 2 weeks left to download these. Technically, you have a good amount of time into October before it changes over to October's games. And we'll find out what those are very soon. But for now, if you haven't yet, make sure you download these or add them to your library. For our first story, though, I want to talk about this. Sony has opened a new blog called SIE.blog, so it's basically like the PlayStation blog, except it's not for the products it sells, rather the company itself. So it really, the way that they're describing it makes it seem as though it's more of an advertisement for the company to work there. They mentioned they'll be posting interviews with teams, what it's like to work at SIE, how partners see SIE, what SIE provides to society, which sounds incredibly strange. It's a brand new blog, so it remains to be seen if anything noteworthy will come out of here, but of course, for this channel, we will be watching it very closely to see if anything comes up. Now, by the time you're watching this information will unfortunately be useless to you, probably, but more PlayStation 5 pre-orders have been made available today across the US, UK, and Canada. Multiple stores, online, also in person. And Sony's also sent out a second wave of invites for their invite-only system for their fulfillment centers. And the consoles are probably already accounted for. As I'm filming this right now in the middle of the night, people are waiting outside to secure these units, and there's not many to go around. There's very low availability. This started with GameStop, which is what I initially heard and sent out a tweet, but there's only going to be anywhere from 5 to 10 consoles, depending on how large the store actually is, and that'll be the case for most other stores as well when it comes to allocation. And we saw this with Series S and X when there was notice for them as well, so online stores will get hit pretty hard. I know it's frustrating, but this will happen with any desirable product. It's happened with multiple console launches. It's unfortunately an expectation of this entire process. Now, there is 2 caveats to this recent batch. Number one, these consoles are not being promised for day one delivery or availability. You could be waiting a few days, probably a week, maybe longer, although that seems unlikely. Just that retailers and Sony are not promising that these consoles are ready for day one. This very much looks like a second shipment. And this could be the company just trying to cover themselves here, trying to under-promise, over-deliver. They would love to fulfill every single order on day one, but if they can't, this is what they're telling you if you did order today. The other thing that we saw is that they're all disc consoles, no digital this time around. So we kind of saw this coming moving forward where, based off that initial pre-order that went up after the PS5 showcase, if you went to a local store, you saw that they only had a handful of digital consoles versus a dozen to 2 dozen disc-based consoles. If you tried to order online, the digital PS5 sold out every single time first. And sure, demand plays a role here, but it really is a matter of allocation. There's far less digital PS5s to go around than disc-based PS5s. We're even seeing this with Microsoft. There's less Series S than Series X. Both these companies are pretty aware of the fact that these lower price boxes are considered less desirable versus the main machines. And this is actually a good segue to our next news story, which is SIE President and CEO Jim Ryan discussing with AV Watch how the company actually considered a lower spec Series S type box, but that ultimately they didn't follow through with it because normally these boxes aren't that desirable. He says, and I quote here, "One thing that can be said is that if you look at the history of the games business, creating a special, low-priced, reduced-spec console is something that has not had great results in the past. We've considered that option and seen other executives who have attempted this discover how problematic it is. Based on our research, it's clear that people who buy a game console want to continue using it for 4, 5, 6, or even 7 years. They want to believe they have bought something that is future-proofed and not going to be outdated in 2 to 3 years." Now, it's worth pointing out some of the differences here, and it does get rather confusing when we consider the fact that the digital edition PS5 is still a PS5, just no disc drive. Series S really is a lower spec box, and that's how it gets to such a low price point. And then Jim Ryan's quote mentions how we've seen these things before and they don't work out, but he's referencing something like Series S, which we've never actually seen something like Series S and X, where you've got 2 different boxes with different technical specifications. I think his quote is more broadly talking about what we have seen before, which are value day one boxes. things like 20GB PS3, Xbox 360 Arcade. I believe there was also an entry Wii U model. PSP, I think, also had one. Vita as well, although that might be our outlier there because the cellular Vita was phased out and the Wi-Fi model was there to stay. But otherwise, generally speaking, we have had multiple SKUs on day one, and almost always, if you're buying within the first 6 months to a year, you're an early adopter. On average, you're willing to pay more money, you want the latest and greatest, and so you're inclined to buy the higher priced box, and that's why they're almost always, the entry-level machines are phased out. And so for something like this, while the context is a lower spec box like Series S, this relates quite well to our previous news story. This is why we're seeing less digital PS5 versus the disc console. This is why there's less Series S versus X. Microsoft and Sony are fully aware of how entry-level boxes have done in the past, and so they are expecting these consoles to be low volume, at least right now. And this is a sentiment I've shared previously as well. I fully expect the digital edition PS5 to be low volume compared to the disc-based console. We may never get a full breakdown disclosed to us. I hope they do, but Sony has never given us a breakdown of PS4 versus PS4 Pro, just a ratio. Microsoft, same deal. They don't disclose numbers, but that's because X1 numbers were never very good to begin with. So, it's tough to judge right now, but we do have allocation numbers, and that's why. If anything, we can also learn from this quote that Sony evaluated a lower spec PS5, and that might tell us that we may not see that PS5 Pro. If they were willing to release a box that was a lower spec than PlayStation 5 right now, just like with what Microsoft did go ahead with, this might tell us that there's not much room left for doing a mid-cycle update, just in terms of cost of actually producing the box, but also the returns that you would get on a machine 3-4 years down the road. It might not even be remotely worth it from a technical standpoint. But anyway, moving on to our next news story. If you remember, we were talking about some PS5 placeholder box art for some of Sony's PlayStation Studio titles, and it looks like some of them were actually real, the final art for Demon's Souls, Destruction All-Stars, and Sackboy Big Adventure, which I am totally okay with because I thought Demon's Souls looked fantastic. There's still GT7 we had as well, and Horizon Forbidden West, but those games are further out, so that art may not be final. Potentially it is, but remember, for GT7 we were hearing that Polyphony Digital was actually asking fans what they'd like to see on that box art. But either way, cool to see some final art for some PlayStation 5 launch titles. And for Sackboy Big Adventure, we learned that there's also a plush edition of the game, just like Little Big Planet 3, where if you buy this special edition of the game, you will get a Sackboy plush, which I'm a total sucker for, so I can easily see myself buying that version. Next up, a few sites have been reporting this, but one of Samsung's newest SSDs, the 980 Pro, might actually be compatible with PlayStation 5. It's a PCIe 4.0 NVMe M2 drive, and it's looking like it has the read-write speeds for PlayStation 5 compatibility. Just that the last time we heard from Sony on this, we did get confirmation. Yes, you can use third-party drives, which is great, just that they would need to provide a list of drives that are compatible because, one, it needs to have the read-write speeds for PlayStation 5 at a minimum, and two, there is no standardized dimensions or form factor for M2 drives right now, so certain drives might not even physically fit in PS5. And it's not just this one. There are a few drives that are now hitting the market that will, in theory, work for PS5, just that as of right now, we do need to wait for Sony to actually tell us what drives will work. So don't order this. Don't order other drives. Hopefully Sony will disclose that soon. We just saw this week Microsoft confirmed the pricing for those expandable Seagate drives that look like little memory cards, so it's more proprietary, just in that you'd have to buy that and you can't use third-party drives. And the pricing for that, 1 terabyte, $220. It's a little eye-watering for some people, but this is the market value for these things. In fact, the 980 Pro, the MSRP for the 1 terabyte is $230. The only benefit on the Sony side of things is that it is third-party, so you have options. The pricing should come down much faster than what Microsoft would be offering for, again, what is slightly more proprietary in nature. For our next news story, and what is kind of a strange left-field announcement, Sony will be letting some Japanese YouTubers play PlayStation 5 as part of the Try PlayStation 5 on YouTube Gaming Week. So starting from October 4th, many popular channels in Japan will get access to PS5. There's no concrete details on what games will be there, how much gameplay, any UI demonstrations, nothing like that, right? And that's what's a bit off-putting about this, or rather just out of place, because normally if there's any major PlayStation product announcements for PS5 or just products in general, it almost always goes through Sony's US channels. Nowadays, PlayStation is a westernized company, and so despite the recent globalization efforts, if there's anything major from this live stream, it would be strange to place it there and not, blast it from the rooftops from Sony's US channels. So one of two things will probably happen here. Either they have access to something that isn't all that revealing, probably still worth checking out, but not that revealing, or if it is, we'll just find out about that stuff before October 4th, and that's plenty of time to actually see something actually play out here. We do have TGS happening. We could have random news drops on the PlayStation blog. You never know at this point when it comes to the PS5 news cycle here, so I guess this isn't all that surprising, but I'd imagine that it won't be huge news. Either way, though, moving on to our next news story, which is PS4 to PS5 upgrades. Maneater is confirmed, so if you're a current owner for that hilarious shark game that the more I watch it, the more I really want to play it, you will get a free upgrade to PS5. You're getting 4K, 60 FPS, ray tracing, DualSense features. Same for the Xbox versions. You are all good to go on that front. Unfortunately, we did get confirmation from Sony about what the deal was with the 2018 Spider-Man Remaster on PlayStation 5, which we knew previously was only going to be available on the Ultimate Edition of Spider-Man Miles Morales. There will not be a free upgrade for current owners of the PS4 game. It's disappointing on the surface, although not all surprising considering the situation of how they're handling it right now, because obviously it's going to be a small period where the game will only be available through the Ultimate Edition of Spider-Man Miles Morales. They did confirm, however, if you buy the standard edition of Miles Morales, you would have a upgrade path of probably the difference of what you pay. So since the base game's $50, you could probably pay $20 in order to get the 2018 Spider-Man Remaster. But outside of that and the Ultimate Edition, that's the only way to get the game. It's disappointing, although we saw this with Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. If you remember back then, that came with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare Remastered, and that was the only way to get the game, was to buy Infinite Warfare. That seemed really absurd, but we all knew that they were going to unbundle those games eventually. You don't remaster a whole game just to never sell it separately. And so, same deal here, where it's a grace period to encourage sales of Miles Morales, but eventually you know that they will unbundle them, and that's what really sucks here, is that it's probably going to be $20 on the PlayStation Store after the fact, and they won't offer any entitlements from PS4 to PS5. Really strange considering that they're offering free upgrades for 3 currently announced PS4 and PS5 games, Sackboy Big Venture, Miles Morales itself, and then Horizon Forbidden West. And that game's going to sell millions and millions of copies, so it really seems as though they just don't want to have to entitle a back burner of millions of people. Rather, they'll be willing to do it when a game launches, but not a back catalog of owners that would move from PS4 to PS5. It's disappointing that this is the route that they've chosen, and one that I really hope that they reconsider. Next up, recently on the Triple Click podcast, Jason Schreier, who's now a reporter at Bloomberg, formerly of Kotaku, normally very reliable with this stuff, mentioned how for Final Fantasy XVI, the game has been in development for at least 4 years, in some capacity, and that the game actually is coming much sooner than people think. This is, of course, encouraging to hear. Square Enix has never had a very good track record with the timeline for releasing their games, and certainly for the previous entry in this franchise. We were waiting a very long time, and it went through a total rebrand and everything like that, but we did see a lot of meaningful footage during the initial reveal for this game at the PS5 showcase. Now, granted, this was the only game there that was not running on PlayStation 5 hardware, so you have to figure that it is still a few years away, but we saw a lot. Enough to the point where you know that they are further along in development than people would probably give them credit for. So this might be a title where we could see it within the next 2 years, probably 2022, maybe 2023, just not that unless major problems hit this game this far along in development, it won't be something where we'd have to wait well beyond 2024, 2025. For our next rumor, this one comes from the YouTube channel Red Gaming Tech, where normally they cover hardware-related leaks and announcements, and apparently their track record is very good. But for something like software, they even admit they don't normally cover this area, but they're working towards it. Anyway, this one started with a Reset Era post where one user claimed that MGS 1 and 2 were coming to PC again, and this is where he went ahead with this video mentioning that he also has a source claiming that Metal Gear Solid 1 is in fact being completely remade for PlayStation 5 and PC as a PS5 console exclusive, and it is a full-blown remake, not necessarily a port or anything like that, but for MGS 2, 3, and 4, that would in fact be more in lines of a port, possibly a soft remaster, an HD upres or frame rate bump, things like that. And also, he alleges that Bloodborne is also real, coming to PlayStation 5 and PC, and that game is very far along as well. Now, this is not the first time we've heard about Bloodborne. If you remember back in June, there was a rumor from Casey Explosion on Twitter. This is when they promised they would make a charitable donation to whatever charity the person that stepped forward chose or something like that. But essentially, somebody did step forward, confirm the information that Bloodborne is real. Then Casey Explosion went ahead and made the donation. Red Gaming Tech mentions that for Bloodborne, it would include a lot of the cut content or additional content that we saw from what was data mined previously. We know that Bloodborne had a lot of cut content or unfinished content, and essentially that this could be a part of the PS5 and PC version coming up. You know, nowadays when it comes to rumors, I just try to be very picky about this stuff and what we talk about here. There's no point in getting people riled up or humoring these rumors when 99% of the time they have no chance of actually being true. And so going into things like these, I like to see multiple sources. I like to see the probability that it could actually happen, some potential. Does it sound believable? This, that, and the other. And so for something like this, it's on the cusp. I would like to see a little bit more. This story got a lot of attention this past week. It would have been weird to not talk about it. And so Bloodborne does make a lot of sense on PC. I mean, that actually fits the bill perfectly for Sony's current evaluation process of doing more PC releases. You could see a lot of copies on PC. It's an aged game. It doesn't devalue PlayStation hardware. We've seen it handed out on PS Plus, and you know, it makes a lot of sense, especially for a PlayStation 5 version where we could see 60 frames per second. Metal Gear Solid, there's been murmurings about a PlayStation Classic coming back, but that's more an area where I haven't seen anything to suggest that that's really going to happen. But if we look at the risk totem pole here, it's lower compared to building a sequel or building a brand new IP. If you can get a competent port studio to handle these games, then you know the risk profile is much lower than some of those other examples, right? So it's reasonable to expect that we could see older games being remade or ported. For now, though, we'll catalog this and keep our eyes on it. Next up, this past week, obviously, we saw one of the largest gaming announcements we've had in a very long time, where Microsoft plans to acquire ZeniMax Media for $7.5 billion. This includes Bethesda, ZeniMax Online, Arcane Studios, id Software, Tango Gameworks. This is a lot of valuable talent, a lot of valuable IP. They bought a whole publisher, bringing their total first-party portfolio up to 23 studios, and now it's just a matter of, will they continue? Well, according to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, they definitely will. Speaking to CNET, he said this: "You can't wake up one day and say, let me build a game studio. The idea of having content is so we can reach larger communities." He essentially confirms to CNET that they will consider buying even more video game companies in the future. A lot of people still reeling in from this announcement with a certain level of anxiety and concern, and certainly if you have that PlayStation preference, this would matter to you, where you're unsure of the company's future or being able to play your favorite games on PlayStation hardware, that you don't have to go out and buy an Xbox, a PC, subscribe to Game Pass. Outside of the fanboy stuff, that should go without saying, but if your budget allows it, you should try to play games everywhere or own a little bit of everything. Content is king at the end of the day, and ironically, the CEO, Satya Nadella, is well aware of this. Despite being openly not much of a gamer himself, he knows, regardless of sector, content is king. That's why he's open about it. You can't really just build a studio from the ground up, so what do? We bring in this content that's already established so we can reach more communities, and that's what it's really all about. And so this company's been very dedicated, and I think I remember like 2 years ago making a video saying something along the lines of Sony should be, you know, afraid of Microsoft because of what they had the potential to do. And at the time, that was after them acquiring like 3 or 4 studios or 4 or 5 studios in 2018. And I said, look, that's commitment. That's commitment then, and it's commitment moving forward as well. Despite how large those studios were at the time and how large some of their recent acquisitions are right now, where they're considered more AA or, you know, B tier, you can devalue them all you want, but there is a certain level of commitment there. And now we've seen a major acquisition that really puts them on the map. And so if all those previous acquisitions weren't any indication, this certainly is one here now. There is a slight rumor that is being paraded around that now they're looking at buying Sega, and there's just a bunch of ridiculous reasons as to why that is. Let's just remember that major multi-billion-dollar acquisitions aren't teased on the internet. And also Microsoft confirmed that there's not going to be any acquisition news coming up into TGS. That, I think, was the original rumor. So, not happening. But these conversations continue to happen. Sony, the same deal here. So we didn't mention this in the Tuesday discussion we had, but how is Sony going to respond or retaliate? Now look, if you don't know, Sony doesn't really have the capital to do something like this. And that's the one benefit of Microsoft, and well, I guess the greater benefit of the Microsoft CEO backing the Xbox division, that they release this much capital to invest in the Xbox platform. And so they are being very serious about keeping that division alive and well, and trying to make a decent foothold into the market that they're going for. But that's still the difference. People are really getting a little mixed up about this. This is why it isn't the most foreign concept to expect that some of the largest Bethesda titles could still ship on PlayStation, because what they really wanted was Game Pass content. And so the real loss here, when you look at the long term, is that these games are not going to go to a PlayStation subscription-based service. Not going to happen. That's almost certain. But maybe they still ship $70 games on the platform. Maybe. Still a possibility, I think. Who knows? Either way, we'll continue to see Microsoft do more acquisitions, and we'll continue to see Sony do what they do best. PlayStation Studios, worldwide studios. PlayStation's had content. This is something Microsoft's been lacking. They're playing the catch-up game, and they've made a very good get with this recent acquisition, but PlayStation is still in the position they've been in. That doesn't take away from what they've been doing, the success that they've been seeing. They have some of the most talented developers in this industry, and Sony has a knack for acquiring the right talent and fostering that talent into a studio that does make sense. Remember, you can't just build a studio overnight. Sony's figured out a good way to do this over time, and that's something that can't be taken away from them, I guess, unless Microsoft steps in with the right check, but you get what I'm saying. For our next news story, tomorrow, September 26th, would have been Outbreak Day. This is the day every single year where Naughty Dog and The Last of Us fans celebrate the game's lore, where in the game, September 26th is when the virus actually breaks out. And nowadays, that's not super appropriate to call it Outbreak Day. Naughty Dog sees that, so that's why they are renaming it from Outbreak Day to The Last of Us Day. And it will still go on as planned for some announcements and celebration tomorrow. What we can expect, not necessarily sure, although it is worth noting at least, we are waiting for an update on The Last of Us faction, so if anything, maybe that. I wouldn't hold out too much hope, but if there was any appropriate day to see Naughty Dog related announcements for something like factions, maybe something with The Last of Us Part 2, another update, possibly something on PlayStation 5, tomorrow would be the day, but again, don't get your hopes up. Moving on, we've got some new patents to go over that were recently uncovered, and we'll start with this one. It looks like it could be the PS5's UI. However, this does look quite different from the initial 4chan leak, if you remember that. And then we had an additional patent that actually matched the 4chan leak in a somewhat similar fashion, telling us that maybe that was the UI. This looks different. However, if you do take a look at it, the top left gives us notable UI features like the friends icon or messages, notifications, things like that. But the bulk of the image there shows a horizontal row of icons, but the actual patent itself describes a method of displaying multiple images and screenshots, perhaps, that relate to the initial to the actual content. So for this, it looks like Horizon, and then you've got multiple screenshots, which could be different save states, or what we know as fact, these could be links to particular sections of the game without actually having to start the game and go to it manually. So from the PS5's UI, you could just jump right to a mission, like you can see in that middle panel there. And so it'd be interesting to see if this is the actual user interface, or rather a smaller section of it, or perhaps viewing further into an application. Again, it's not confirmed, of course, and we have an older patent and the 4chan leaks giving us a different idea of what it looks like, but of course the UI could have changed a good amount by now. We'll have to wait and see. The next patent is yet another motion controller where it looks like it could be used for PlayStation VR. These ones look a lot like Valve's Index controllers, and it appears as though there definitely could be the potential for finger tracking, which would be fantastic. We know that Sony's evaluating that behind the scenes as well. But more importantly, one of these panels actually shows PlayStation VR, the actual headset, doing inside-out tracking. So actually pointing towards these controllers, and this would be a tracking point and a tracking position, so it might not rely on the more traditional method of the PSVR we have today, where it's a camera pointing at your entire setup, which really is just the light source from your PS Move controllers and the headset itself. That inside-out tracking, like on Oculus Quest, much more ideal, works a lot better, gives you that movement of freedom, a lot more reliable tracking, which we really want for this. And while nothing is guaranteed when it comes to patents, this is really getting me excited for what could be that next generation PlayStation VR. Now, with all of that out of the way, it's time to get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you could win a $10 PSN code. I'd like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 code, it's very easy. easy. Follow the link down below. We do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are all the news stories that I want to talk about, you all. On Saturday, we had a minor update to PS5 pre-orders and a bunch of pictures of the console in real life, which was great to see. And then on Tuesday, we also had our lengthier discussion about Microsoft acquiring Bethesda, so go check that out. We discussed way more there than we did here just now. Moving forward, though, we're locked and loaded on the PlayStation 5 at this point. I've got a handful of videos that aren't PS5 related, but anytime those videos go up, there's little interest, so I'm finding it tough to figure out a place of where to upload those, not next to major PS5 news, because that kind of looks silly. So I don't know, we might save some of these projects going into 2021, but remember, this is all PlayStation, not just a PS5 channel. So we do everything in the world of PlayStation, and just a minor warning as to what the content might look like moving forward as we cover this brand new, exciting hardware launch, admittedly. Until then, though, that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Becker. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.